Go for it.
Here. Stephanie, do you want to have it with the screen? Chris is introducing.
Oh, just minimize.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
I think a lot of people are outside. Richard, can you get the people who are outside? Stephanie, is this full screen?
Just keep it like that.
Okay.
Please come in and have a seat. Shut up. Thank you all for coming. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Eddie Jones, our first lecturer of the school's time here at Arcosanti. So Eddie is a great architect, and he's also an important and beloved member of our school community. And much can be said about his work and about his place in the lineage of kind of desert modernism in architecture. A lineage that includes Paolo Soleri and the architecture in which we are situated this evening at Arcosanti. And, you know, a lot has been said. So I'm going to point you to this book, this recently published book of Eddie's work and the work of Jones Studio, in particular their residential projects. There's a lot has been said about the work by a lot of famous architects in this book, by our own Aaron Betsky and his wonderful introduction to the book. So I will kind of refer you to the book to learn more about Eddie's work beyond this lecture. What I thought I would do was think about, since we are a school of architecture, maybe get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of design and talk about something that fascinates me about the book and about Eddie's work. And that is the kind of contrast. If you look at this, if you go through this book, and I had a great time looking at it recently, the contrast between the kind of clarity and simplicity of the plans and sections and the kind of richness of their material realizations in the kind of realization of the work itself, the kind of the exuberance of the textures and materials, contrasted with the very kind of clear and simple organization of the plan, is remarkable to me, and not just to me. Aaron picks up on this in his introduction. Billy Chien, in her quote, notes that Eddie is both irrepressible and disciplined. When his beautiful forms take flight, they are held aloft by rigor. So that stuck with me because here at the school, we're in the business of teaching architects how to design architecture, or indeed how to design anything. And the subject of rigor comes up a lot. In particular, the relationship between what is the relationship between rigor and kind of free expression in design. And in popular parlance, rigor refers to a kind of severity or strictness. In design, I think it refers more precisely to these things that make, that are hallmarks of good design. Kind of economy of means, kind of clarity, consistency in the work, and a kind of structure throughout the work. It's, in a sense, it's about following the rules, even if those rules are of your own making. So, I tell students that rigor is important, but that's not always what draws them to a piece of architecture that they love. If they like the more kind of phenomenological aspects of architecture, like how the light comes in, or the kind of richness of the material, or the exuberance of form, and I think that one kind of follows the other, and looking at the book, I suspect that that's true of Eddie's work as well. We could also talk about the word organic, which is another term for a description of Eddie's work that comes up in the book. Herb Green in the book refers to Eddie's work as organic in nature. And organic, the organic in architecture is still a kind of heavily debated subject. And it's unclear exactly what is and what isn't organic, but I think that it's clear that organic refers to kind of living systems. It's or the state of being alive. It's no accident that the words organic and organization have the same root. Organization was coined by early 20th century physicists who coined the term because for them, the difference between what made living matter and that which was not alive was simply a question of organization. So, what I'm hoping to hear a little bit tonight within the context of this design school in front of all of these designers is about the relationship in his work between rigor and discipline and, in the words of Billy Chen, this kind of irrepressibleness in Eddie's work, and about kind of what makes architecture come alive. So, with that.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome. Eddie,
Got a lot to live up to. There we go. How many of you heard about the artist named Andy Goldsworthy? Very well known. Anybody that knows him loves the work, and I certainly do. And this example is meaningful to me. The books I have on Andy Goldsworthy, he doesn't say anything. He just photographs the work and puts it in a book, and that's that. So anything I say about this is what I've construed. It's what it means to me. And then we're going to talk about what it means to architecture. What has it got to do with architecture? But I like, when I talk to students, I like to sort of get outside of the context of architecture, go to the realm of art because it's a little bit less complex. So here we have, I've called it a twig dome. Andy Goldsworthy is British, but he lives in Scotland. He has the unique talent of walking out into the wilderness and waiting for nature to speak to him. On this day, he gathered materials within, a 30-foot radius, you can see there, and he built a structure. He took a photograph and then he walked away. A week later, he comes back. Maybe a month later, he comes back, and you can see that nature has already started to reclaim it. The passage of time and nature are very closely related. Months later, and it's gone. We talk about sustainable architecture. how much more sustainable can you get than to not even leave a footprint? Not even have the ego to care that there's nothing left after the passage of time. Or, Mr. Goldsworthy waits for low tide. He builds a series of stone arches, again, gathering material from the site, waiting for nature to tell him what to do. He finishes, takes a photograph, and the tide starts to come in. Tide starts to dismantle his work. High tide, low tide, it's dismantled, but instead of disappearing, it leaves a mark, which starts to talk about the durability of materials. So how can, this is very influential to me. How do I manifest that in architecture? Well, let's go to the source. Again, I hope you guys recognize this house. It's the Rose Possum house by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1942. This is probably the only example that I know of where he broke his own rule about building on the crest of a hill as opposed to below the crest of the hill. This was right on top. It happened to overlook the Biltmore Hotel, looking west. The Possum sisters moved in 1942. 6 months later, the house burned. The twig dome disappeared, utilizing fire as opposed to a seasonal change. And the stone, the durable stone, left a mark. In 1973, I arrived in Phoenix. The first place I went was Taliesin West. The second place I went was the Rose Possum ruins. And I saw this, and I was moved, but I had no idea of what it was going to do to me. And you see, how you parked, you ascended stairs. You literally walked through the house, under the house. There's the Biltmore. You turn, you enter, you turn. Amazing sequence of entry. 30 years later, I get a project nearby that I call the Outpost, and I put it right on top of the hill. Not because I was wanting to emulate Frank Lloyd Wright. What I wanted to do was, purposely have these elongated walls, level parapets, accentuating the curve of the hill. And there's that stair, starting at the base, ascending the stair to find the front door somewhere. That's regionalism. I just told you a story that gave this design substance. It's not arbitrary. It's not emulation. It's influence. 30 years ago, I was moved by that sequence, and it found its way into something I did later. In the background is Sanavir, the dove of the desert, the white dove of the desert. This is north of Tucson, south of Phoenix. You guys need to see it. It's beautiful. Father Kino built it. Father Kino, if that doesn't ring a bell, then you don't know anything about Southwestern history. I would suggest you bone up on that. He built missions from central Mexico all the way up the coast of California. Fortunately, he did one here. But the subject of this image is the Ramada in the foreground. The locals, the indigenous natives, gathered their materials, within a very small radius. Those are Palo Verde trunks, and with branches as beams, and the smaller trellis, those are Ocotillo branches. And look at the result. They didn't have electricity, they didn't have air conditioning, but they damn sure knew how to live in the Sonoran Desert and create shade and natural ventilation. What's that got to do with anything? Well, this same house that I started with is clad, among other things, in wood. Wood in the Sonoran Desert gets eaten, like the twig dome, very quickly. And one summer, it starts to show the passage of time. I never use wood in the desert. because it's going to deteriorate. But I'm changing. I was talking to Stephanie, and at my age, I've learned that Mother Nature is a much better designer than I am, and so I relinquish my pencil to nature so she can finish the architecture, like she finishes an old barn in Montana. That random light that you see with the random missing of boards, it's not random. There is a reason that board fell off and the one next to it didn't. Because there was some chemical reaction that caused it to warp and snap the connection and it fell off. That's a natural thing, isn't it? It has so much integrity. And the result is that beautiful light. So, on the Outpost, I clad that tight. Those wood boards were tight. Within a couple of months, I get this beautiful light pattern coming through. I didn't design it. The passage of time designed it. And I'm cool with that. In fact, I prefer it. But that's the twig dome. That's the redwood that burned and disappeared on the Possum house. Back to the Possum house. Why am I, relating these two things together? There has to be more than just specifically the entry sequence. See those curtains? Those are the curtains that blew into the fireplace that set the house on fire. But that's not the point of the image. Looking through this 2-story volume of glass to the north, the Outpost site is here. And when Lacey took me to see that site for the first time, and I looked over, I knew where the Rose Possum house had been. And it's like, I bet that's in that photograph I remember in the Nature Materials. The book, The Nature of Materials by Russell Hitchcock, was the very first architecture book I ever bought with paper route money in Oklahoma City. And I go to my library, dig it out, and it's like, damn it, that's the Lacey stuff. You see, I had to respond to that story, right? That's regionalism. That's, maybe that's the point. You can talk about context. You can talk about vernacular architecture and responding to that. You can talk about climate forces, and that's what causes, buildings to look a certain way in certain regions. But that's the easy part. That's the least you can do. I think we search for stories. We try to understand the community, and we find these compelling reasons to make design decisions. Now, I just showed you a lot of pictures of wood, very weak, deteriorating wood cladding. But actually, the most prominent material in this house is rammed earth. And rammed earth lasts forever. Those walls will be there over 1,000 years. While the twig dome, the wood piece starts to disappear. But that will always leave a mark. Just like this 850-year-old 3-story dirt building still exists as a ruin, as a mark. It's made of dirt. You can see it very easily by taking 5 minutes off of the I-10 on your way to Tucson and visit this ruin. Pueblo Casa Grande, 850 years old, made of dirt. And I could go into, why is it sitting out in the middle of nowhere? It appears arbitrary. Nope. The Gila River used to run right through that site, and that had the water, and so that's where they set up shop. The river relocated itself a long time ago. So let's leave the Sonoran Desert for a bit and go to the Pacific Ocean, the Oregon coast. Oregon coast, another unforgivable climate. 4 feet of rain, 104-mile-an-hour lateral winds blowing the rain against the house, seismic zone 5. And there are all these beautiful seaside cottages up and down the Oregon coast, around Cannon Beach. This is where it is. And have you ever shopped at Basha grocery store? This house was designed for Eddie Basha and Nadine Basha. Wonderful people. Fortunately, Eddie passed away, but Nadine still lives here. And they wanted They bought the site on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean for obvious reasons, right? So they wanted the view. So this elevation is orthogonal, it's straight, it parallels the cliff face, it parallels the beach, it parallels the horizon, all business. Party in the back. The forest just comes cascading down the hill, and the house just sits there and opens its arms and makes a garden out of the forest. And this is the mother gutter of all time. And this is, it's a glass pavilion in this seismic zone. Everybody else builds houses and they cut holes in the wall and they put a window in and they think that is bringing the outside in or some BS like that. How do you stabilize a glass pavilion on the Oregon coast? Well, two things. All of these tubes are steel columns, and that fireplace is an 8-foot cube of concrete laterally bracing that house. And you can see a few other bracing techniques that keep the house from racking. Now, steel structure on the coast is kind of like building out of wood. It's ironic. The steel will corrode and disappear. Wood, on the other hand, which is fragile in Sonoran Desert, will last for 100 years if it's cedar. So we attached a cedar framing system to the steel structure to protect it, and also to, have a material that's going to weather with dignity. Now let's go to Montana. Totally different climate, right? Totally different context. How do you be regional? This compound, when I first took my dad to see this, we turned the corner and he goes, "Well, which one did you do?" I said, "Dad, it's one house." It may be in a lot of pieces, but it's one house. Isn't that beautiful? Do you see how the winter sucks the color out of the landscape to only gray and silver and light blue? So that starts to tell me, it helps me make material decisions on the interior. It's like a campfire in the middle of winter out in the forest. The warm, the honey color, it beckons one to come in. Signal Man, the sculpture that you see up there, he commissioned that because his friends couldn't find the front door. And he's a pilot. In fact, he's a jet pilot. And he invented the golf bag that when you set it on the fairway, the aluminum legs would pop out. He was like 22 years old when he did that, made millions of dollars. Now, springtime, all the colors back. This has a stainless steel roof. Those are 4 foot by 8 foot by 1/4 inch thick stainless steel shingles. It's outrageous. The cutouts that you see around the overhang, what's it doing? Well, even at Taliesin and all those little cubes of wood, they create a dotted line. Wright said the dotted line is what the desert wants. I take it further than that. I think rather than a straight edge, to have a material that allows air and sky to cross through it is important. It starts to dissipate the solidity. But look what happens in the winter. Those triangles catch the pillows of snow. That's beautiful in itself. But when it starts melting, I get multi-layered icicles forming a necklace, a sparkling crystal necklace, completely around the house. Back to the Sonoran Desert. This is a couple, very special couple, very dear friends of mine ever since they commissioned the house. This is a 30,000 square foot house on Stanford. There are two people, an elderly couple, no kids, and they have a huge museum quality art collection of contemporary art, oceanic art, medieval art. I mean, it's amazing. The gallery, the collection is displayed 13 feet underground. It's a 20,000 square foot gallery, but it's underground, so the neighbors don't freak out that there's a 30,000 square foot house by them. You know, that's kind of the first story. The real story is some of these artifacts are 3,000 years old. They were discovered below the ground. What can I do? I gotta put them back, right? I gotta put them back underground. And not only that, I have to surround them with dirt walls, all that came out of the hole. This gallery is the length of the football field. I'm standing in it, that 150 feet that way, 150 feet that way, 65 feet wide. Imagine the mountain of dirt that came out of that hole. This is great. I get to do 4-foot thick, rammed earth retaining walls. And the artifacts go home. And when you descend, you know, there's that fragrance of the earth and the sediment lines of the wall. But upstairs, they live in the opposite kind of space. Now, what the hell are we looking at here? This is a stacked glass wall under construction. Nobody would build this. There wasn't a glazing contractor in the Southwest that would accept responsibility for this wall. I heard it's against code, it's structurally unstable, you can't do it, it's against the law, people are going to get killed, nothing. So now what? Well, the general contractor was a bicycle racer, and his two bike mechanics were very precise guys. And they said, we'll do it. So this was built by bicycle mechanics. You're seeing the top half. It's actually 25 feet tall and 75 feet long. And it's undulating. If I stand like this with my feet 1 foot in front of the other, you could easily push me over. But as soon as I do this, you're going to have trouble pushing me over. So this wall is completely self-supporting. There are no kickers or columns or rebar or anything. It's just stacked glass. It's stunning, right? I mean, it looks every bit as good as this photograph and even better. It's almost like you're underwater. And those bicycle mechanics cut every piece. Outside curve, inside curve, beveled in, beveled in. It took them months, but they did it. I had the privilege of working for another very important art collection. You notice I said art collection instead of clients. The Logans, their contemporary art collection is considered one of the top collections in the United States. And, you know, their primary residence was in Aspen. Vail, Colorado, surrounded by aspen trees. And if you've ever seen an aspen tree, it has a beautiful circular golden leaf that flutters in the wind. So we hung brass squares to filter sunlight over the entry to remind them of their golden aspens. That's what I told them. But I've never been able to get this painting out of my mind. That's Gustav Klimt, one of my favorite artists. And, you know, the gallery, there's 5 different galleries in the house, all differently day-lit. And I could talk about that all night. Now, this one really relates to the Twig Dome, Andy Goldsworthy's Twig Dome. This is my first project in Arlington, Texas, 1994. My brother and partner, Neil, we knew we had gotten this commission to do a nature center, and we could pick the site in River Legacy Park. And so we started exploring the woods there, and we found this fort that children had built, gathering their materials within a 20-foot radius. The next time we went back, it was gone without a trace. What's that got to do with architecture? Well, how pure is it that there were children that could listen, like Andy Goldsworthy, to the forest, and the forest told them what to do and how to do it. I really believe that, because they had no pretense. And this is the sketch I did on the airplane, coming back from exploring that day, and it got built. And it's still there, and what's wonderful, one of the perks of being my age is the first children that signed up for nature class here are now adults, and many of them are teaching at the Nature Center. Okay, this is the Sea of Cortez, another region, right? Another culture, another climate, all these different conditions, strong Spanish influence, of course. It's Mexico, and I embrace that. But it's a modern interpretation of a vernacular architecture. But it's not without substance. This is a osprey bird. It's a predator. It lives along the coast. It fishes. And it scavenges its material to build its home at the top of power poles. See the glass insulators? Which inspired this sculpture that's on the top of the house, which is why we named it Casa de Nido Osprey, home of the osprey nest. This guy is 5th generation Mason. He's young, and he's building what's called a bovine. And you can see he started with one brick. You don't see shoring, you don't see a form, you don't see a jig, you don't see scaffolding, you don't, all you see is his hand and the palm of his hand, the curvature of the palm of his hand. And he's starting out on a square structure. And he built that. Eyeball only, nothing else. Experience, his God, and his eyeballs. And they are stunningly beautiful. I would be nuts not to take advantage of that, right? If you had a resource like that, would you not want to explore it? Regional or no regional? Oops. And here's something. These balustrades, this is the truth, every country I've ever visited, and there are a lot of them on this planet, every city, every country, I have seen these balustrades. Probably the Greeks, invented them, then the Romans overused them, and then suburbia has really overused them, and Puerto Penasco, it's a huge cliche. And I thought, I bet I can figure out how to honor that thing and do something beautiful with it. They're even in Renaissance paintings. I mean, you can't escape them. But notice, every time there's a heavy cap, a heavy base, and they're always captured on either end. I have a contractor in Puerto Penasco that's fearless. He cast in place every one of those balustrades to make that screen wall. That's a vertical and horizontal application of those stupid cliches, right? But it's beautiful. You don't have to even care what they are anymore. And I even use them as a balcony railing. But look at the difference. It's not a heavy base. They're growing out of the top of the wall, and they're not capped. You can see air in between them. Doesn't it make all the difference? So it's no longer a cliche. At least I don't think so. Same guy built this vault. I understand it's the largest spanning vault in Puerto Penasco. Beautiful, isn't it? And you can see the glass here that's keeping the air conditioning in, but it might as well not be there. Let's move away from houses. Let's get a little more complicated. you could even say, well, gosh, those are just houses. There's bigger and more important structures. How do you manifest these stories in regionalism on larger structures? So this is the Performing Arts Center for South Mountain Community College, one of the least served communities in Phoenix. It's South Phoenix. It doesn't matter that the parents are very proud of their children that actually get to this college and want to be musicians or performers. And so they deserved a building that would be a beacon at night. When the recitals are advertised, you can see this building from miles away. But why does it look the way it looks? Well, if you know about saguaro cactus, I know you know what a saguaro cactus is, and you probably have been pricked by the needles and think, well, those are to protect the cactus from critters. Well, they are. But did you know they're also there to dissipate heat, because air can circulate around them and cool the cactus. And the furrows actually always have at least one-sided shadow. But this metal cladding that you see on the Performing Arts Center, that is a standard roof eave flashing. Completely out of context and a different application, but it's projecting and it's allowing air to circulate around the top and the bottom, which cools the surface. And Maria, one of the oldest and most wonderful members of the Jones Studio family, when she was a little girl, she had this violin. She brought it in before we started the project, and we were inspired by it because look how beat up that case is. The outer case is tough, just like that rusted metal cladding is tough, but inside is this beautiful piece of furniture that makes sound. And so the interior, it also undulates, not unlike the inside of a violin, and every curve is calculated to reflect sound to a seat. So every seat gets reflected sound. The Phoenix string section of their orchestra uses this facility to practice it. Chris mentioned an architect named Herb Green. I wouldn't be surprised if no one in this room has ever heard of Herb Green. But he was in my opinion, one of the great architects of the 20th century. He's still alive in Berkeley. But when in 1953, he designed this house in Norman, Oklahoma, within driving distance of OU, where he was teaching, and Bruce Goff was the dean of architecture. I grew up in Oklahoma. I became aware of this house very early, and I was, just like the Possum ruins, I was moved. Couldn't explain it, but if there was ever a vernacular example of architecture for Oklahoma, it is this. And it doesn't look anything like anything else, does it? The locals call it the prairie chicken. Isn't that sweet? But to me, it is completely original architecture. I tried for 40 years to get inside this house, and the little lady would not let me in. Finally, she died. I'm in. With Herb Green showing me the house. He hadn't been there for like 50 years. But, okay, what's that got to do with tonight? Well, I carried this inside of me, since high school, this image of this house. And I get a commission in Oklahoma. And it's like, here it comes. Here comes the story. Remember, it's called the Prairie Chicken. This is called the Prairie Raptor. And it's a feathered roof, just like Herb's house was feathered. It's got the upper level picture window, bay window that watches the storms come in over the prairie. It's a lot bigger, a lot more complicated than Herb's house. This is the entry. We call it the jungle. Why does the house need a jungle? Well, I'll show you in a minute. But they got glass loft up there and the illegal stair that leads to it. I called that a play structure. Whoops, for these guys. They're children. African serval cats, at least 40 pounds apiece. Not too friendly. But you I tell Warren and Becky I'm designing this house for them, but you know, I can't not design the house for the cats too. And this was on the cover of the poster. Why would I choose this? You know, to express the, you know, that you want to look for common denominators. And, you know, not that stories are the same. They're always different stories. But a common denominator is there are stories if you can find them, if you look for them. Sometimes maybe you have to even invent them yourself. But most of the time, I never have to invent a story because it's usually sitting there in front of me. How many of you been vaccinated? Did you notice the beautiful little glass bottle that vaccination serum came in? That's what that is. Warren owned one of the last family pharmaceutical businesses in America. He had millions of these little tiny bottles. Again, what can I do? I have to use them. I have no choice, right? Because they're beautiful. And we strung them together, suspended them from the skylight. You know, they're soap bubbles suspended in space. I also put them between two pieces of glass to make windows. This is family table number 1 at Jones Studio. We worked in this Al Beetle building on 12th Street for 33 years, paying rent and sitting at the same table. And then in 2006, we were asked to exhibit our work at Scottsdale Center for the Arts. And no, the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art. Will Bruder was the architect on it. And we had been asked to exhibit before, and it's so flattering and it's such an honor to be asked to exhibit your work. But we had done it, you know, and it's a lot of work, and you hang the exhibit, and then you come back in 4 months, and then you take it down, and you never know how it went. And so I said the only way we're going to accept, and I'm a tough guy, right? Because I didn't think they would go for it. I said the only way we're going to exhibit is if Jones Studio can be the exhibit. They love the idea, and there we are. Family table number 2 at Smoka. 4 months of working in the public eye. It was very unproductive, but we loved it. It was the most fun we've ever had. 3 years ago, we built the final Jones Studio family table number 3. And Tempe, you're all welcome to come over and visit anytime you want. But without these people, you know, there wouldn't be the book, there wouldn't be any of these buildings I'm showing you. We love our space. It's overgrown now in just 3 years because we harvest all the rainwater. We have a 2,000-gallon septic tank that's buried. And we bought a septic tank because it could support the weight of a car, but it's full of rainwater, and plants love rainwater. Now remember the Logan house and the aspen leaves? Well, the house is built in Estancia, which is in Scottsdale, North Scottsdale. It has to be the snobbiest neighborhood I've ever worked in. The golfers went nuts. You know, these things would go shh. You know, when the breeze would blow, and they demanded that we take them down. Well, we only took them down on the golf course side, only on the upper level, but it was a windfall for me because now they're my conference room ceiling. Doors always open for you guys. It's full of natural light. Color is brought in by light, not paint. I'm getting towards the end now. We've talked about a lot of fun things and literally the joy of architecture, but we have other responsibilities too. We get, you get, I get, you get. We get the best education in the world. There's nothing like the education of an architect, and that sort of, you have to accept responsibility for the ability to think. The ability to recognize the intersection between art and engineering and problem solving. And so at Jones Studio, we get involved. And this is the Arizona 9/11 Memorial. It was done many years, not 2001, but more like 2005 or 2006, dedicated. And, it's the Arizona 9/11 Memorial. It's not the New York 9/11 Memorial. It's not Shanksville 9/11 Memorial. It's the Arizona 9/11 Memorial. How can Arizona have a 9/11 Memorial? Well, we were traumatized like the rest of the world. And this was a national design competition. And we won unanimously because we created the most obvious solution. The sun always comes up 63 days a year in Phoenix, and it always goes down. So we culled through the newspapers and magazines for emotional sentiments that represented our reaction and the dates, the important dates that occurred, and we laser cut them into this stainless steel visor, which you can see casts the words on the concrete bench. So what? Well, if you get there in the morning, there's nothing there. And if you're patient, these pixels start to occur. And then finally, you can read it. We call it moving memories. And then, if you wait long enough, they'll turn to pixels again, and then they disappear. They go to sleep to wake up the next day. Must bond back. You can't win battles of terrorism with more battles. These were quotes, not ours. They were quotes from the public, representing two ends of the spectrum, right? And I just picked these because they happen to be together. Who can complain about that, right? I mean, we're trying to capture all the emotions. Unfortunately, this must have been 2006 because it was an election cycle. And Republican candidates one of them said, if you elect me governor, I will tear down this memorial. Why? Because it says you can't win. Everything that was passive, they rejected. And the Arizona Republic, as you know, they like a juicy story, don't they? Beat the shit out of us. And for a year. But by God, we're still standing. Jones Studio is still standing, and all those fucking politicians are gone. Sorry for the language, but I'm still a little emotional about it. So now let's go to the next controversial thing, where architects have to take a stand, right? Great Wall of China. Man, now that's a wall, isn't it? That's a serious wall. That's a 3,000-year-old idea that didn't work. But it's amazing. I mean, if you look at this photograph, you see this thing sticking. I mean, it's like Christo's running fence, isn't it? I mean, in a way, it's just beautiful because it defines the topography. And notice how the vegetation comes right up to the base. How can that be? Because the wall follows the ridges. It drains equally on both sides. Now, here's our wall, running perpendicular to the ridges. It just cracks me up. But still, if you didn't know the negative things about it, and if you could revegetate this, there's something artful about it that it defines the topography. But you can't get rid of the contentious political nature of our southern border. So when Jones Studio was hired to do a land port of entry, you got your airports, seaports, and land ports. And the land ports, this is in Nogales, south of Tucson. There's Nogales, Arizona, and there's Nogales, Sonora. Sister cities. There used to be one city called Nogales. Wall goes through. Now you have two different communities separated by a rusty 3,000-year-old idea that didn't work either. Alberto Rios is Arizona's first poet laureate. He is a wonderful man. He was raised in Nogales. And when Vicente Fox, who was the president of Mexico, came to visit Arizona, this is decades ago, Janet Napolitano was governor, and she commissioned Alberto to write a poem to commemorate the visit of the Mexican president. And I won't go through the whole poem. It's very beautiful, but it's the last sentence that Joan Studio hung on to for 7 years to make sure that we turned the map until we saw clearly the border is what joins us, not what separates us. Now that is so fundamental. If you start designing a land port of entry because it separates two cultures, you're going to end up with a different kind of architecture. But if you go into it and go, no, this is what separates, this is what connects us, then your attitude is completely different. And we vowed, and we were mandated by the federal government, believe it or not. Our client, we had the federal government, the behemoth of the federal government, and we had the behemoth of Customs and Border Protection. Customs and Border Protection, their mission, I'll be kind, protect the United States, intimidate everyone coming across the border. But our mission was to welcome everyone, minimize intimidation, and express the dignity of our country. 53-acre site. This is the lobby. You enter here, light-filled, surrounded by landscaping. You don't feel like you don't matter. There's water features, lush landscaping on a 54-acre site in Nogales, Arizona. Nogales, Arizona barely has the ability to supply water to its community already. How can we impose a 54-acre site on them that's lushly landscaped? Well, all of the roofs, all of them capture rainwater and channel it to this storage basin here. It has the capacity to hold 1 million gallons of rainwater. You might say, well, it doesn't rain in Arizona. Yes, it does. Monsoon season, the first one filled that 1 million-gallon tank, and it's never been empty since. We took this photograph in 2008. Appalling, isn't it? That says nothing about the dignity of our country. It says nothing about we welcome you. In fact, I hope you don't get killed trying to cross over by getting run over. 7 years later, same position. Now, I mean this, guys. This is why we're important. We get to do this. We get to make a difference. And that's why I say you have responsibilities to make your community better. Every opportunity to do architecture and landscape architecture, and that's one thing, by the way, you do it with passion and joy, sincerity, and commitment. I'm almost to the end now. And this really doesn't, it has to do with context. This is Camelback Mountain. Big, fancy house for a rich person that's not going to get built. But you can see from the topo, this arroyo coming down, this natural drainage pattern off the mountain. This is up, this is a valley, this is a valley. This house is like the length of 2 football fields. Why? Because I wanted to capture the washes. If you're familiar with Marion County Courthouse in California that Frank Lloyd Wright did, one of his last projects, that thing bounces from knoll to knoll. And this was an early sketch I did. And there's the floor plan, the upper level floor plan, very linear, of course, but it was the most efficient thing to do. The lap pool spans that arroyo, the spa spans the other one. And that's a hand drawing. I like showing my hand drawings because nobody else does them. And I think I do them pretty good. The thing is, I love doing them. I refuse to I might give up my pencil to nature, but I'm not giving it up when it comes to destroying my buildings. Last project. This is the School of Architecture in Tucson at U of A. That's what we started with, another asphalt parking lot. On the right, it is now one of the favorite gardens of the entire campus. God dang it. All students use it. That's the south exposure. We capture all the rainwater. We capture all the condensation from the giant mechanical units. I mean, you realize that all mechanical units produce crystal clear water that typically goes into the sewer? That's crazy, isn't it? This is an 11,000 gallon tank, vertical, embedded in the building. So every student, every year, every semester has to look at it. And maybe it'll start soaking in. But that thing's never been empty either. Look at this is a maybe 3-year-old photograph. It's protecting the south side of the building. School of Architecture and School of Landscape Architecture, School of Planning. When we interviewed for this job, we promised that we would find a way to equate the dependency of both disciplines. The building depends on landscape architecture to cut the heat gain. The landscape architecture depends on the moisture coming from the building in order to grow. Water jet cut or chiseled into the risers of the sunken classroom is a poem. You saw the first slide when you entered in, but I said nothing about it, did I? And whenever I'm talking to students, I purposely end with this poem because it's critical. Let's see what your interpretation is. At the gate of the garden, some stand and look within, but do not care to enter. That's an Andy Goldsworthy cauldron, by the way. Others step inside, behold its beauty, but do not penetrate far. Still others encircle this garden, inhaling the fragrances of the flowers, and having enjoyed their full beauty, pass out again by the same gate. But there are always some who enter, and becoming intoxicated with the splendor of what they behold, remain for life to tend the garden. Which one are you? Only you can decide. And your garden may be architecture. Your garden may be education. Your garden may be a social activist. But are you willing to spend your life doing it? Will it give you that much satisfaction, that much joy that you will dedicate your life to tending that garden? It may take you a while to figure that out. It may take you a lifetime, but I'm rooting for you. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer questions if you're not too tired. I typically refuse to leave until somebody asks a question. You know, you saw a lot of information tonight. You saw a lot of different materials. You saw a lot of different forums. You saw, issues of sustainability and water harvesting and storytelling and how that is interpreted and translated into architecture. I hope it makes the architecture better. You're kind of a few people in the United States that know these stories now. Most people don't know the stories. All they can do is just respond, if they happen upon, one of these buildings. Hopefully it brings a smile on their face. But with your education, you have new eyes. You can't go to a piece of architecture without assessing it. What are the qualities? When I was in India, and I toured several ancient forts that were built on top of the plateaus, and you couldn't tell where the plateau stopped and the building began. It was so blurred. And because they were so old, they hadn't invented steel, so the spans were very short. And so you would look at these from below, and they were massive. They were the opposite of modern architecture, which is lightweight and transparent. These were the opposite. And when I'm up there experiencing this shelter, this protective surround of monolithic material, stone floor, stone walls, stone ceiling, stone roof. It's one thing with many variations, and I'm blown away. I start changing. You know, I was telling Stephanie that when she said, "What was my turning point?" I said, "Well, you know, I kind of started getting bored with modern architecture. I had a lecture called Tired of Pointy Metal Buildings," and but what moved me was everyone else that was there. And they weren't architects, and they were, some of them were old, some of them were young, some of them were kids, some of them were poor, some of them were rich, some of them had educations, many of them didn't. But we were all responding to the same thing. We got it. It was fundamental. Whereas, you know, modern architecture can be alienating sometimes. Now, I'm not criticizing. I'm a modern architect, for Christ's sake. But I learned something very important those 3 weeks in India. And ever since then, my work's gotten a lot heavier. And maybe you see that I'm contrasting the transparency with the weight. You know, one's augmenting the other. What were we talking about at dinner? 1 + 1 = 3. You know, this plus this makes a third. And that's what I'm interested in. So I answered my own question. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for you. I really enjoy how you describe all the connections that you're building from memories of your experience, sort of projects. And I would love to hear more about what I would call your research process before the project, of finding all these connections. And the other part of the question is, I'd be curious to hear if and how this is something that you teach either students or your firms. How do you transmit not the knowledge of the research process?
Well, to the end of your question, do I teach this? I try to do my best. Did I teach you guys anything tonight? I mean, all I can do, good, I'm getting 2 thumbs up back there. I probably, you detected some passion in my voice. I mean, I love it. I love every bit of it, and I'm happy to share the stories. As far as research goes, I would never describe myself as an intellectual. You know, that's not me. I'm an emotional architect, and in my research, you know, the only theory I've ever developed is the one about nature and the passage of time and how it can, if you are aware, it will make your building better. You know, an old building is so much more valuable than a new building. Even an old mediocre building is better. I mean, you know, if you've been to Italian hill towns, I'm sure, is there any one great piece of architecture? No, it's just the whole thing, and the fact that there's fungus growing on the stone, or there's, you know, discoloration and stains dripping down the wall. Again, this is such a longer story than I've indicated tonight. We were talking about going to Mexico City. That's been a very meaningful thing for me too, and I developed a lecture about it's all about time, or it's about time, or something like that, and I would show a Legaretto project, pristine, you know, uniform color, perfect landscaping all in a row. I love his work, but here's Legaretto. Everyone admires it. And then here is a photograph of Barragan's first house. It's almost 100 years old. Fungal stains, starting at the parapet, coming down the wall, discoloring it, vines, broken tree limbs, wildness. It's like, which one has more integrity? Which one of these images is lying? You know, it's not the one that's showing the passage of time. And you can even, you know, if you really want to, you can start analyzing it. Why is the discoloration at the top of the wall? Because the water sits on the parapet, and all the dust that gathered there, you know, before it rained, is starting to come over the edge. And it stays wet the longest. And so algae starts growing and fungus. And it all makes perfect sense to me. There's nothing arbitrary in nature. There's plenty of arbitrary, capricious behavior in architecture.
I love the title of your lecture, which you hadn't mentioned while you were speaking, Portable Regionalism, and I think it speaks to kind of common interrelationships that are reciprocal, that carry through to every project. And I think it's so beautiful how you presented it in all of your works, but I'm particularly curious about how you pitch that in challenging works like the border, Customs and Border Protection Project. How do you do that?
Well, I can say we did it.
Yeah.
Where do I even start? You know, I could give a whole lecture on the Mariposa Land Port of Entry. We were newbies. We hadn't even designed a ticket booth at an amusement park, much less an inspection facility. And this is a major commercial trucking facility too. 65 to 85% of the produce, probably what we ate tonight in the salad, crossed that border in a truck. During harvest season, it is billions of dollars of commerce, and again, that is one of the things that pisses me off, because only on the 6 o'clock news do you hear about these negative things. It's really that much, and there's this huge business component to land ports of entry. Trucks, loading docks, inspection, security. What did I know about any of that? I had to learn. And fortunately, I had been a national peer reviewer. Have you ever heard of that? The GSA appoints what they call national peer reviewers, and it's an important appointment. And I immediately got assigned a border station to review in McAllen, Texas. I knew nothing about what I was doing. It was my first assignment, but I am a good listener. And I just started watching. And then I did another one, and then I did another one. And when I approached my partner to say, you know, we should go after this port of entry in Nogales, he goes, are you kidding me? We have zero experience. We've got 11 people. And I go, no, I think we, you know, I kind of know a little bit about this now. And so we submitted, and fortunately for us, we were the only firm from Arizona to get shortlisted. A firm that knows a lot about how to design in the Sonoran Desert, which apparently was very clear in our presentation. But, and they had given the contract called for 3 variations on a port, and here's kind of what you need to work with. And the port that was there was just, it was dangerous. You saw the photographs, and it's filthy and dust and fumes. I mean, the border agents suffered, the public suffered. It wasn't good for anybody. But I did, you know, the best I could with what I had, and all 3 schemes were rejected by the port authority. He said, I can't use any of these. You know, everything's changed. It needs to be this, this, and this. And it's like, great. I can't wait to rethink this whole thing. Which it gave me the freedom to just think about it in a way where nothing was being imposed on me. So then you start looking at truck circulation and patterns and how the whole thing's supposed to function, and it just starts designing itself. And when we were done, I mean, we got a National Design Award on that, not only from the AIA, but from the General Services Administration too. And they, in writing, said this is going to be the new model for all ports on the southern border. It's not, because none of them can be the same, but that's okay. It was a heck of a compliment. But I've got a great team, Stephanie, and you know, I master planned the port, and I set the direction. But Brian Farley got into the weeds, and he made sure that not a drop of water was going to be wasted. Not on the roofs, not on the parking lot. And so when and you got to clean the water, right? So now we have sunken gardens, and it just all informs itself. And it worked. I mean, it didn't take a year for those new tiny little plants to just, because they were getting rainwater. And remember, we said, it's like we all held hands for 7 years and said the border is what connects us, not what separates us. And I'm not oversimplifying it. It was our mantra. So every design decision was not contaminated with politics. It was all about doing the best job possible and showing respect for our visitors. So, yeah.
So, what did you call it? The stick?
Twig dome.
Twig dome, right? So
I don't know what he calls it.
Yeah.
That's what I call it.
So the twig dome, part of the idea of that is that it's just going to disappear, right? And that return to the environment.
Right.
But the pictures are something that last for
Yeah.
potentially ever, right?
Thank goodness.
Yeah. And so I'm really kind of curious about this idea of like, you know, sort of letting go and saying like, well, the building, you know, nature will complete, or maybe nature will just take it back entirely. I think
She will, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and I think you've really adequately explained, you know, like some of the power that history brings, right? It's like it's sort of an implicit storytelling in some way too, right? And you know, when you're talking about the lichen growing in the walls, and it's like, yeah, I'm totally entranced by the, you know, emotional content of that. But I'm also curious about this idea of ego, right? And so it's like, you know, there's some things that will last, right? And then there's some things that, you know, even if like if falling water was swept off of the waterfall, I think we as a culture would probably rebuild it, you know?
Yeah.
Like it almost lasts as like a permanent object just because of the power of the object, right?
Right.
And I'm kind of curious about like whether or not you see, you know, like do you hope that all of your buildings will last for 100 years, 1,000 years? Maybe the ideas will last, maybe the messages behind the buildings are the things that last. Like, what do you hope to transmit?
All I hope is they will be loved for a long, long time. And I used to start my sustainability lectures with a photograph of falling water. It leaks like a sieve, it's cold, it's hot, it takes a lot of energy to keep it going. But why would I use that as an example of sustainability? Because we love it so much, we keep it rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt. And you've probably heard this before from other architects. I don't care how sustainable your building is, if it isn't loved, it's not sustainable. And so that's all I hope for, that somebody will love my buildings enough that they won't tear it down. But that's naive. You know, I did the Carson Golf Course Clubhouse at ASU. Again, that's a whole story in itself. But that building is slated to be torn down because developers are coming in. They've already torn out the golf course. They're already building 4-story nondescript office buildings, just like a barracks. And I don't know why they've avoided tearing down the clubhouse, but the architects were not creative enough to figure out how they could repurpose that building. That is disgusting. Whether it's my building or not, it's just, I have yet to meet a building that deserved to be torn down and start over. And I mean that. And gosh, I had this wonderful little residential project in Scottsdale, old subdivision, tiny little houses, low-pitched roofs. They look like Haver houses. You know who Ralph Haver was? Haver houses are very important. I mean, Ralph Haver, you know, we still have design assignments to do affordable housing that's beautiful for the masses. We're still doing that. He did it. He actually pulled it off, and there's a waiting list to get these. And they were like 1,400 square feet, low-pitched roofs, exposed structure. You know, and they've all had different iterations. But anyway, this little subdivision was kind of like that. And this woman had bought this house that still had the original guy in it. He was ancient, and the house was just, it was a throwaway. I mean, anybody else would have torn it down. I couldn't do it. I literally could not do it. And that's great, because that caused my mind to open and go, okay, now what am I going to do? And so I proposed. It was a big lot, fortunately, and I proposed. I said, Patricia, the roof is rotten. Let's take the roof off. The drywall's got mold. Let's gut the house. Let's even jackhammer out the slab. And let's plant a garden inside these four walls, this little box. And then, the way you get to your new house, you have to walk through this garden in a ruin to find your front door. You know, that would have been a beautiful thing. And the pandemic hit, you know, the stories that way. But there's always, it's even like those balustrades, you know. Even though I imposed them on myself, I could have easily had a client and said, but you gotta use these balustrades. Fine, bring it on. I might have mentioned at dinner, I've got a new client in Oklahoma, and they're the CC&R say it has to be old world architecture. Great. And then I'm doing a stockade in Arlington, Texas. It's like a movie set. But what a great starting point to create something poetic and meaningful. And I am not afraid of people needing this style or that style or whatever, because I'm tired of doing the same thing. You know, not that I've ever done that, but I just have very little patience. I'm just going to keep exploring and testing. And you know, that's my research, is not repeating myself and trying to challenge myself to go in a new direction. And then I learn something, don't I? So,
yeah,
anyway.
I love that idea of that.
Oh, yes, sir.
Well, I was going to say that I really liked some of the interior shots in the book, and I almost wish it would have stayed there a bit longer.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Well, that's a different lecture.
I thought it was beautiful. I also wish it would have shown floor plans and maybe shown us like the other things.
Well, then we would have been here to midnight.
But I know.
And I there were like 140 slides when I started, and I whacked it down, so I didn't exceed an hour. But I appreciate what you're saying. I'm certainly not blowing it off, but you know, I'd be happy to do a lecture and just focus on one or two projects and get into them a little more thoroughly.
Well, what I was thinking about the yoga boards, it's like, for example, you had like pretty wealthy clients here that I'm sure they want 4-car garage or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I think that stuff is like the opposite to sustainability. But at the same time, I also really enjoy the fact that you would make it sort of like stretch out the property or whatever, or use it more, and then make them walk like an entire football field. Therefore, it's sort of like, okay, well, you want to go to the sauna, then you got to enjoy the view, and you're sort of forcing them to do that.
Well, I think it's a gift. You know, if you're cognizant as a designer of, for example, something way longer than it is wide, there better be a reward at the end of that axis. You know, because it is a focal point, whether you admit it or not. And to your point, that 30,000 square foot house with the underground gallery and the stacked glass wall, 30,000 square feet, a husband and a wife. It had a one-car garage, and it had one bedroom.
What the heck did you use up the other 30,000 square feet on?
Well, 20,000 is the underground gallery. I mean, it is a fully functioning art museum. It's private, but there's shipping and receiving, there's curator offices, there's the break lounge, there's a scissor lift to bring down sculpture and bring it up, there's a packaging room to box everything, there's a lab with microscopes. I mean, it's a full-fledged museum. So that was 20,000 square feet. Then upstairs, there's their one bedroom, there's their living room, and I remember showing 6 chairs in the living room. They go, what do we have 6 chairs for? There's only 2 of us. I said, Maxine, where am I going to sit? Okay, we'll have 3. And so they have 4. But they're a wonderful couple. And is it an extravagant house? I mean, God, the fabric skin unfolds, to either any position to create privacy, but open up the views. I mean, it was an amazing privilege to get to do that house. Who's going to buy a 30,000 square foot house with 1 bedroom and 1 car garage?
Yeah, I was going to ask, because I remember you mentioned that they did have children, so I was wondering if part of the plan for the kid was that out there passing from a house museum.
I wish, but it will be gifted. It's gifted to a university, and the collection's gifted to a big deal museum, and I hope that the university will, open it to the public. It's such a shame, that I can't share the house. Betsy got to see it, but few people. Their insurance policy just doesn't allow tours. I respect that. I get to go over anytime I want. But we were so anyway. I think the fact that it's going to be gifted to a university. I mean, who does that? I mean, so I don't. I mean, it is an extravagant house and an expensive house, but it's not self-indulgent. They needed the 20,000 square feet for all of that collection. They needed 10,000 square feet on the upper level for their combined office. They had a gym. They watch TV, so blah blah blah. I wouldn't have traded that experience for anything. I can't think of one I want to trade either. So I hope you all have as much fun as I've had. If you have half as much fun as I've had, you're going to be, really lucky. But I think you can. Architecture is rewarding. It never stops giving back. It gives back way more than it takes. And if you are this person that tend the garden for life, that's not about money. That's about loving what you do. And I am telling you, if you do anything for the money, you're going to fail. If you do it because you love it, the money will come. I promise. And it may take decades, but in the meantime, you're having the time of your life.
Thank you so much, Eddie.
You're welcome.
That was amazing.
And I've donated a book to your library. So. Well, thanks for coming. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much.
Such a great lecture.
Thank you.
Yeah. The storytelling is, probably what comes through to the clients. I'm sure
There's
it
more.
comes through to us. Yeah.
We have a final event. Chris will announce it.
Oh, yeah, one more thing.
Chris wants to play the piano.
Actually, he was interrupting.
That's right. Sure. All right, thanks everybody for coming.
Lectures are.
Lectures are, yeah. It's time to go to sleep.